Hi, I'm Nikki from The Fabulous Life Builder, where we talk about integrated attachment style and personal development. Now, for this video, it has been requested to me to talk about a topic called overcoming self-hatred. And I think not only myself, but a lot of people struggle with this. I think actually everybody struggles with this from one time or other, but there are definitely people that struggle with this all the time. Can we change and overcome our self-hatred? Absolutely, yes. But it is going to take some work. So, where do we start? I would suggest first taking note of your internal dialogue. Throughout the day, make a note if it helps to even write it down or, at least take a mental note of how your thoughts are. What is your internal dialogue and how you speak to yourself? And one of the things that seems to land with people is when I tell them, imagine somebody else externally talking to you the way you talk to yourself internally. How would you feel about it? How would you receive that, right? Would you say, oh my God, this person's really mean, or they're kind of coming off as abusive, like the things that they're saying is just, it's really cruel, it's not nice. I don't think I want to be around this person. They're saying some really cruel things, and you realize like that's what you're doing to yourself, when you have very negative self-talk. So make sure that you start with the self-awareness of your internal dialogue. How are you speaking to yourself? And if somebody else spoke to you like that, how would you feel? And if you wouldn't like somebody else speaking to you that way, why are you speaking to yourself that way? And being aware of it is basically step one of this whole process. All right, step two, I would say, is question your stories. Now, our brains are naturally wired to put meaning to everything. That's just how we are as humans. And if it's running on autopilot and you don't really realize what kind of meaning you're put behind things, sometimes that can be very self-destructive. So, if you happen to be telling yourself a lot of negative stories, I want you to kind of take note of that and then sit down and question your stories. If you have a lot of stories such as, for example, say, I'm not good enough, question that. How do you know that you're not good enough? Is there any evidence that you are good enough? Even if it's like the smallest evidence, you come up with 3 different things that show you that you are good enough. Maybe you are good enough because you always pay your bills on time. Maybe you're good enough because, you smile to strangers and you're very caring. Maybe you're good enough because you're good at taking care of your animals and they're well fed and they're happy, right? Or maybe you're just good enough because you got out of bed, you took a shower, you brushed your teeth, and you took care of yourself for the day, right? It could definitely look different from person to person. So always question the stories. Do I know that the story that I'm telling myself is true? And can I find evidence that it is not true? If you can't find evidence that it's not true, as many people who struggle with self-hate are probably going to run into this situation and they're going to be very resistant or very unable to find reasons why maybe their story is not true. Another thing to ask yourself is, okay, what do I need to make this story true? What would it look like to make this story true, right? And how can I make that happen? What are the steps? Back to the I'm not good enough. All right. What would it look like or what would it mean for me to be good enough? And what steps would I have to take in order to be good enough? And again, that question might show up, or the answers might show up completely different from person to person. Step 3 that I would highly recommend is to start healing your core wounds, or even be aware of your core wounds. If you would like more information about core wounds and healing core wounds, this is a topic that I am going to be talking about much on this channel. So core wounds are basically the root and the fears of our stories, really. And subconsciously, our core wounds drive us to a lot of actions. And if we're not self-aware of it, we will be driven unknowingly to a lot of self-sabotaging behaviors. And because core wounds, for a lot of people, especially for people that have struggle with self-hatred, it's very important to become self-aware of yourself. Core wounds can be rather powerful on the stories we tell ourselves, our internal dialogue, how we get our needs met, how we interact with people. Core wounds, especially for people that struggle with the self-hatred, they can be very, very strong. So I would look into what are your core wounds and then take the steps to healing those core wounds. And a lot of people find when they do start working on their core wounds, they find that in all the areas of their life, things actually start drastically changing for them. And so I kind of want to stop a little bit and even talk about, like, how did we get these core wounds? Where did these stories come from? Like, how did we get to the point where our internal dialogue is very abusive to ourselves and we have this self-hatred, right? How did we get like this? And a lot of times, all these associations around the world, it came to us as we were growing up as little children and we were learning and observing about the world. And a lot of us didn't have good caregivers. A lot of us had maybe even teachers, or we were bullied all the time. And we learned through repetition of certain things being said over again and certain events happening over and over and over again, things that weren't so positive. We've learned that that's how life is, and we built that filter around that. So take like a small child who had very critical parents, and their parents were very hard on them, expected them to be, perfect all the time, and had these really high standards for them. And whenever the child messed up, they were criticized. Maybe they were criticized all the time about, how they dressed, what they looked like, their grades, how smart they were. And growing up, if you hear that over and over and over again of like, oh, how could you do this? Oh, why are you wearing that? Oh, I wish you were better. Oh, you only got a B instead of an A. Why did you fail? Then you start having that internal dialogue yourself, because you learn that's how people talk to me. So that's how I talk to myself now. And this is how I see the world. And wasn't necessarily your fault that this was all programmed into you, but you are responsible to programming that out. If it can be programmed in, it can be programmed out. I like to stress that point. So you got that negative internal dialogue from repetition of growing up from your caregivers who have repeatedly talked to you or treated you that way. So you think in order to erase that, you can combat by doing the same thing of having repetition of more positive things. Now, it definitely does take time. Because if you think about it, if you've been carrying this negative internal dialogue and these negative stories about life since childhood, that was a long time for that to build. So this is definitely not going to happen overnight doing all these exercises. And it's probably not going to feel even very comfortable, and your subconscious probably doesn't want to be on board with it even at first, because it's out of the comfort zone. Your subconscious is like, oh, I don't understand what's going on right now. Like we survived this far with being critical and having all this negative talk on themselves. Like, why do we have to change, right? But with repetition and over time, you start getting comfortable with it. And with practice, with anything like practice, it starts to become more familiar, and then you will have to, not think so much about it like you will at first. So it definitely takes time, and please be patient with yourself and be kind with yourself in this process. Okay, so step 4, right, is know that your emotions are valid. Just because, you are feeling negative and crappy, and maybe the stories running in your head aren't particularly true, don't discredit yourself, all right? You are feeling these emotions for a reason. Now, our subconscious speaks to us and lets us know through feelings and emotions. So when you have an emotion coming up, it's your subconscious saying, hey, there's something here that needs addressing, that needs attention. And a lot of people that do have problems with self-hatred normally are not very in tune to their subconscious and what their subconscious is trying to say to them. And I think it's very, very important to get in touch and learn how your subconscious speaks to you. And this is also something I will be talking a lot on this channel. But, if you're not familiar with it, the first step is really don't invalidate how you are feeling. Even if the stories are not true, again, even if the stories you're telling yourself are not true and you are feeling sad, you are feeling crappy, or you are feeling negative, right? They're valid. And there's a reason why you are feeling bad. And sit with those emotions. Don't try to be like, oh, well, I shouldn't be feeling this, or these feelings are just completely bunk, so I'm just going to pretend to be happy, right? That's not really how to address that, and you can't unwill the subconscious, and the subconscious is going to come back, boil up to the surface, and be like, no, we feel really bad right now. So definitely acknowledge how you're feeling, what you're feeling, know that they're valid, and even sit with those feelings. And you can even meditate on it and take some time and think like, okay, this is how I'm feeling. And it's okay to feel this way. And if you need some time, even if you need like a day to just sit and be like, okay, I am sad. I do feel pretty crappy. I do feel depressed, and that's okay. And take some time to feel that way. Usually, if you try to suppress those feelings, you're actually going to feel crappy for longer than the people that sit there and acknowledge their feelings and observe their feelings and let themselves feel that. And then they kind of process and get over it a lot quicker. Sometimes it's not necessarily fun. It's not a great thing to acknowledge like, oh, I feel really depressed right now, and sit with that. A lot of people don't like doing that, and it's totally understandable because we all want to be positive, right? To some extent. But no, trust me, it's very beneficial to sit through them and to acknowledge it and to even observe your feelings. And it's even good for people that aren't very in tune with their emotions to begin with, is to think and consciously make note of like, what am I feeling inside my body? Not only am I feeling sad, but what am I feeling physically in my body? Am I feeling a tightness in my chest? Maybe you're feeling pain in your lower back. Maybe it shows up in, a headache. It's going to show up for different emotions for different people. So take notes on how you physically feel as well as sitting with your emotions and just letting them be. All right, if you are struggling with self-hatred and you don't know where to start, remember step 1, take note of your internal dialogue and make note of it and realize Is it positive and is it negative? And work on your internal dialogue. Step 2 is question your stories. What meaning and stories are you telling yourself about things happening to you in life? And are those stories true? And can you find evidence that maybe those stories are not true? Or if you can't find evidence that the stories are not true, as some people have struggled with that, what would you need for those stories to become true? Step 3 would be working on healing your core wounds. Step 4 is acknowledging your emotions and knowing that they are valid, and sit with them and take note of them, and just know that it's okay to feel crappy sometimes. And these are just kind of like the surface level, basic steps on what to do if you're struggling with self-hatred. If you need help or any more in-depth information about this stuff, you can always DM me on Instagram for one-on-one coaching, or you can like and subscribe, as I will definitely be making more in-depth videos about all of these subjects. And just remember that you are important and you do matter, and your emotions are valid, and you can do this. Again, if the self-hatred has been programmed into you, you can program it out. And if you can promise me one thing today, promise me, please make a promise to me. And no, it's not to hit the subscribe and bell button, but you can do that as well. I will not complain. I will love you. Mwah. But if you can make one promise for me, promise to try to come up with at least one thing that is evidence that you are good enough. Just one thing, even if it's a little thing. Promise me you will do that, and promise me you will take these steps and you will start your journey to not being so self-hateful, that you will not be so hard on yourself. All right, see you later. Bye.